August 28th, high noon, squirrel hunting tip of the day for you beginners out there. You know, a squirrel cadence, as far as how fast they eat, will depend on three things. It could depend on how hungry they are. It could depend on if that squirrel is scared or not, or leery. And it could depend on the time of day. We're going to focus on afternoon hunting. If you go into the squirrel woods and they're eating hickory trees, now it can be windy. In the afternoon, your ears are probably more important than your sight versus hunting in the mornings. Okay? Now, as we progress later into the summer, into fall, some of this information I'm going to give you will be less beneficial. Meaning, right now here in Tennessee, the nut crop is hanging on the trees nice and firm, meaning generally a 5 to 20 mile an hour wind won't bring anything out of a tree nut-wise. This will change, of course, as we get closer and closer to October. Okay? So when you're hunting in the afternoon, you may hear something fall out of a tree. You should pay attention if something fell out of a tree. You may hear occasionally what seems like an isolated, like it's lightly sprinkling in the woods. Should you pay attention to that? Yes. That may be your only clue to locate that squirrel, to know his presence is there. Squirrels generally, early in the afternoon when they're eating, they will eat slow. They're that smart. They'll eat slow so it doesn't disturb their hearing. See, when they're really grinding on that nut, it affects their hearing. Okay? So they will do what you call, they'll chip a nut. And they may periodically stop. Periodically start back. I'll give you one example of what happened the other day. And I know it was a gray squirrel doing this because I seen him, but I never got a shot at him. He's eating in this tree, and this cow come above him out of the woods, and I didn't even know the cow was up there. I thought it was a bunch of turkeys back in there when I first heard it. Well, that squirrel was chipping that nut. I could hear that stuff barely. It was windy too. There's 15 mile an hour winds blowing. He quit when that cow went by him. He starts back about 10 minutes later. All right? Hearing that squirrel quit eating is also a signal for you. If he quits eating, quits dropping, quits chipping that nut, you better not be moving. Especially you better not be making any noise. He's listening for noise. He's watching for danger. Okay? Now, this can happen sometimes, and the sun angle can help and it can hurt. Depends. You may hear this slight chipping of this nut. You may be able sometimes to look up toward the tree, and the backdrop, you may actually see these little sprigs occasionally falling, which may give you a clue as to location. Where in the hickory tree is he? That's the hardest part of squirrel hunting in the afternoon like that. You got to find out where he is in the tree. You know, a squirrel generally won't go from one side of a tree through the trunk and go to the other side to pick a nut. They can. But you've got to get zeroed in on him so you can start focusing your eyes in that area looking for some kind of movement, be it his feet, his tail, or him going to pick another nut. So when something falls in the woods, you need to lend some credence to it, okay? And start trying to decide. Now, jaybirds generally don't fool with hickory. Crows, now in oak trees, yeah, they'll go in there and they can fool you. They can make those fall off. But when you hear something fall and you see a hickory tree in the area, and it helps to be able to recognize a hickory, and you can hear this from a substantial distance in the woods, you know, 75 yards, 50. So it puts you on guard, like, uh-oh, potential squirrel or squirrels. And just because there's one up there chipping that nut doesn't mean there's not others up there. They just haven't started eating for whatever reason. You know, sometimes a squirrel will eat in the morning in a hickory, he may never leave the tree. He just go up there and lay down. And his belly gets to hurting him a little while later and he'll go back to eating. It's not always the case, but now they can do it. So your ears are very important. And then yes, you start using your eyes. In drier conditions like we have here right now, boys, it's dry here, okay? We're in drought. The leaves being drier helps magnify the slight sprinkling that may happen when that squirrel is chipping that nut and alerts you better. All right? Now, if you're watching a tree on a hillside, keep in mind the angle of the hillside and the tree growing on it. The actual little sprigs falling are going to fall substantially farther down the hill than where you think you think the squirrel is in X spot, but you have to account for that slope. All right? I've looked up in the trees, a lot of hickories over the years, boys and girls. And I try to share data, you know, and nobody told me this when I was younger. I figured it all out on my own. There are some out there who wants to be squirrel hunters. There's lots of little things that crop up, little scenarios, and you have to decipher them. And the squirrel's not always up there doing acrobatic acts in a tree where you can spot him real easy either. A lot of times they'll creep around in a tree when it's drier and it's bright. Now, I mentioned chipping this nut early mid-afternoon. If you sit at that tree and you don't spook those squirrels, watch what happens as you get about 35 minutes before sunset. Watch what happens. Those squirrels will go to eating faster. And they realize their time of eating is drawing to an end. And as the daylight, as it gets darker, they get braver and feel more secure. Okay? Now remember, if you're hunting in the morning, you can spook a squirrel and he can start eating this same way, momentarily. He may eat slow for a while until he starts feeling more and more secure. But on up in the morning, he may only chip that nut when he finishes eating. He may never go to eating heavy or really gnawing on that nut, dropping lots and lots of little sprigs on the ground. And the fox squirrel and the gray squirrel behave a little differently here, okay? That fox squirrel's a bigger squirrel. He's agile in those trees too. Make no mistake. That's going to conclude the video.